Today we will see the sensations carried by the ventrolateral column of the spinal cord and the pathways involved. The anterolateral column is also known as a ventrolateral column. Sensation it carries the pain, that is a nociception in response to a noxious stimuli, a thermal sensation. Then we have a crude touch. Crude touch, that's also known as a protopathic touch. The pressure, it's a crude pressure or a deep pressure, not the gentle pressure. A deep pressure, tickle and itch, and sexual sensations. These are all the sensations carried by the anterolateral column or the ventrolateral column in the spinal cord. As the name indicates, the anterolateral column, thus it is divided into two parts. One segment is anterior, in the anterior column of the spinal cord, and the other segment is in the lateral column of the spinal cord. And these things are identified as a anterior spinothalamic tract or a ventral spinothalamic tract and the lateral spinothalamic tract. So now this is a cross section of the spinal cord. Just to recap the various tracts and pathways in the spinal cord, just to make you familiar. Here is this side. On this side we have the ascending tracts. On this side we have the descending tracts. These are the major tracts as taken from the guidance textbook of physiology. Let us see. So you already know this is the posterior column, and these are fasciculus gracilis and fasciculus cuneatus. And this is the anterior column. This is the anterior column. Here the ascending fibers are ventral spinothalamic tract. And this is a lateral column. This is a lateral column. In the lateral column, we have four major pathways. One is the dorsal spinocerebellar tract, somewhere here, okay. Then ventral spinocerebellar tract, because it is ventral to the dorsal one. Then we have the lateral spinothalamic tract here, and this is the spinotectoral tract. So our ascending fibers, the what we call as a ventrolateral or anterolateral spinothalamic tract. So that means this is the anterior spinothalamic tract or a ventral spinothalamic tract. This is the lateral spinothalamic tract. Just to remind you of the descending tracts, this forms the lateral corticospinal tract, rubrospinal tract, olivospinal tract, and then vestibulospinal tract, the tectospinal tract, and the ventral corticospinal tract. Because corticospinal tract, this is a crossed one, this is an uncrossed one. Just a brief review of the tracts in the spinal cord, but we are mostly interested in these the brown oval things, that is the lateral and the ventral or ventrolateral spinothalamic tract. So here I mentioned two pathways of anterolateral column sensations. One is anterior, that is ventral, another is lateral. The anterior spinothalamic tract, this carries the crude touch, the pressure. This is a deep pressure. It's not a gentle pressure. The tickle carries the tickle. A tickle is a very peculiar sensation. And then sexual sensation. These are the four sensations carried by the anterior spinothalamic tract. So from the lateral spinothalamic tract, we have the pain, that is predominantly, that is the main thing. Then thermal sensation, then the itchy sensation. Okay, these are the, I have divided them, even I have now categorized what sensations each one of them carries. So that means the anterior spinothalamic tract is a crude touch, the pressure, the tickle, sexual sensation. lateral spinothalamic tract, the Nucleus, that is pain, thermal, and age. Now, just let us see how they are organized in general. So the receptors for these interlateral column sensations, I'm talking about both the interlateral column sensations. The receptors are nociceptors, that is for the pain. Then we have the thermal receptors that are meant for warm sensation and a cold sensation. Then we have for the touch, that is a crude touch, the Pacinian and other touch receptors. Other touch receptors, you have a number of other receptors, but they may be a deeper, their attributes are less because these are not very fast fibers. We have the pressure sensation, the deep pressure, the Pacinian corpuscles, Ruffini organs, and free nerve endings. Here also in the crude touch, we have the Pacinian corpuscles, free nerve endings, and other touch receptors. So what are the fibers carry these receptors in the interlateral column sensations? Predominantly carried by slow conducting fibers. So these slow conducting fibers are thinly myelinated A delta fibers and the unmyelinated C fibers. These are the fibers carrying these receptors in general I'm talking about. And where these fibers relay, because after the dorsal root ganglia, they should relay in the spinal cord. Yes, they relay in the spinal cord in lamina 1, 2, and 5. That's especially the nociceptive relays. But the touch pressure and the touch ones would be involving 3 and 4. So that means the spinal nuclei or laminae involve 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So they especially 1, 2, and 5 are a primary thalamic relays for pain sensations. So these are called a wide dynamic range receptors or relays. Other areas, because we have the spinal nuclei, so that is not only for this, other areas also include all the gray matter present in 1 to 8 layers of the spinal cord. These are non-specific actions. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 are specific thalamic projections or reticular projections. Now, this is what I wanted to say. You can just see that the mechanoreceptors of the A delta fibers, which carries the touch sensation. So these are relayed in 3 and 4 laminae. Then nociceptors, which are the thinly myelinated nociceptors, these are carried to lamina 1 and lamina 5. That is the A delta fibers of the carrying the pain. A delta fibers also carry the cold sensation. These cold sensations are also relayed in the same nuclei or same lamina, that is 1 and 5. Then we have C fibers. C fibers have a nociceptors, thermoreceptors, and mechanoreceptors. Because here you have a cold receptors, here you have a warm receptors. These nociceptors are relayed in layer 1 and 2. And all these things, nociceptors, that is the C fibers, that is unmyelinated fibers, are unmyelinated fibers carrying the thermoreceptors, and unmyelinated fibers carrying the mechanoreceptors. That's the pre-nerve endings. They are relayed in. These are primary relays, but they have collaterals. All of them give a collaterals to 1 to 7 or 8 segment of the spinal cord. You can just see here, this is one of those laminae coming here, so relaying in lamina 1, and then after the lamina 1, it is also relaying in lamina 5. So then after relaying in lamina 5, this is ascending as a, look at this here, this is the spinothalamic, anterolateral spinothalamic pathway. You just see that this is carried as a spinothalamic pathway and it ascends up to the thalamus. So this is one relay. And I have also mentioned that the relays are extensive, because some relays are required for spinocervical tract, some relays are required for the posture regulation, the spinocerebellar tracts, dorsal or ventral, or some relays are necessary for the reflex, the segmental reflex activity. So these are the collaterals. You can just see that this is the primary one. This is the pain pathway is coming up here. It is relaying here in 1. Then after that also 5. When they are relayed in 1 and 5, that is the primary thing. Then they also give a collateral here for the spinal motor neurons and for the vestibular spinal neurons, which begin as a vestibulospinal or spinocerebellar tract, which will begin as a spinocerebellar tract or spinocervical tract. Okay, that is about the relays. So what I meant to say that these are primary relays, and not only primary relays, there are at least 4 or 5 different type of relays. One to the primary ones, the second for the reflex activity, segmental reflex activity, the third for the posture regulation, that is through the cerebellum, fourth for the integrity of the body, that is the positioning of the particular segment or body part. So that is how it's been relayed. Then after relay, you can just see that the first relay I mentioned for activating the spinal withdrawal reflex or a cross-extensor reflex. So this is the first relay. Here, this is going to the motor neurons, alpha motor neurons. That is for activating withdrawal reflex, and this withdrawal reflex is associated with a cross-extensor reflex. That's one part. The second relay I mentioned about the spinocerebellar tract. So that means the spinocervical and spinocerebellar tract for posture regulating. These are collaterals they relay at the spinal level. But the major part coming from the lamina 5, the neurons, the axons from these neurons ascend as a spinothalamic tract for this spinothalamic tract reaches the thalamus, and then from thalamus it reaches to the cortex. For the purpose of this is finding out, or it is giving the location and its attributes. Little bit, not as great as a posterior column sensation. So then we have additional relays, because nearly 90% of such fibers, they ascend up to thalamus and relay into the VPL. Nearly 5 to 10% of the fibers are reach up to the level of the reticular system in the medulla or the midbrain, medulla pontine and midbrain level. And then we have the spino-mesencephalic projections. They will end up in the spinal, that is a periaqueductal gray or a mesencephalic or a midbrain region. Okay, so those relays, so the first relay is the reticular relay, and from the reticular system, it will go to the reticular nucleus of thalamus, and then it is for the arousal and autonomic responses. Okay, the mesencephalic relay, it connects hypothalamus, amygdala, cingulate cortex, insular cortex, and this is for the emotional analysis, the pain, and other things associated, affective things associated with this part. So that means I have made so many relays. So they are even a little more what I mentioned earlier. So that means at least there are 5. The red ones are the primary ones that makes you to realize the sensation is originating from a particular site in the body. Okay, so now after having been considered the spinal relay, what happens? This is the pathway. I start from the receptors here. receptors from the pain, cold, warmth, tickle, and itch or touch. They come here. This is dorsal root ganglia. And from this dorsal root ganglia, they relay in primarily in layer 5 or lamina 5. So now these ones, they will either ascend as a anterior spinothalamic tract, or if it is a pain and thermal sensations, they ascend in the lateral spinothalamic tract. I have boxed them, anterior and lateral spinothalamic tract. They will ascend as a ascend. Here is relay. This is second order, or second order neuron begins. This is second order neuron. Now this second order neuron reach the thalamus. That thalamus is the ventral-posterior lateral nucleus of thalamus. So from here, the third order neuron begins. Thalamocortical projection goes parietal cortex, postcentral gyrus, and that is for along with other somatosensory components. So this is a pathway, generalized pathway, or a pathway which is necessary to identify where a particular sensation has been originated. One important point here, so this is carried by receptors or whatever, and these are slow conducting fibers, and they are relayed here, and either depending upon the sensation, whether it is going in the lateral column or in the ventral column, they reach the thalamus and then relay here. Let me read this thing for you. Receptors, or whatever the receptors for pain, pressure, thermal, and crude touch. The first order neurons, so this is the first order neuron from A delta and the C fibers. Usually these fibers are A delta and C. Relay in the spinal, I mentioned 2, 3, 4, 5 because I have put all the sensory modalities because if it is only 1, 2, and 5 in case of pain, 3 and 4 in case of touch and the cold or warmth, something like that. So I have put all because I have included all type of sensations. The second order neurons, these are the second order neurons. They start, the axons from this thing ascend as a spinothalamic tract. So the pain and the thermal sensation ascend as a lateral spinothalamic tract, crude touch and pressure as a ventral spinothalamic tract. They reach VPL, that is the ventral-posterior lateral nucleus of thalamus, and from there, third order neuron begins. So this is the third order neuron, and this third order neuron is projected to S1, the postcentral gyrus of the parietal cortex, and that is also known as a Brodmann area 312, with homunculus as shown for the posterior column sensations. If you are looking at that, so from here the S1, it is further processed as it is processed for the posterior column sensations at S2 and somatosensory association area for attributes and analysis. But since the representation here, they are less intense, and localization is not as precise as that of the posterior column sensation. Now coming back here, this is the homunculus, which I am trying to revise you. You can just see that large areas, you can just see that it starts the most interior part of the sulcus. We have the genitalia, then comes the toes, then the ankle, foot, the ankle, then leg, then hip, the trunk, the neck region, then head, then we have shoulder, arm is coming here, elbow, then forearm is becoming a little longer there, then wrist, hand, and you can just see that different fingers having a greater location there. Then we have the eye, nose, face, upper lip, and large representation. Then we have the jaw, tooth, gums, jaw, and lower lip. And we have the tongue there, large representation, the pharynx, and the intra-abdominal. Intra-abdominal has a little So to summarize, I have just summarized here large areas for hand, fingers, face, lips, and tongues. Hand, fingers, face, lips, and tongue. A little for trunk and hip. If you are looking at the trunk and hip, very little if you compare with this, if you just see that. Then least for viscera. This viscera is here, somewhere here. This is for all the intra-abdominal contents. Least for viscera. So thus the area of the cortical representation, the area for the cortical representation is proportional to the functional significance of a particular component. If it is a very fine one, so the greater is the representation here. Thumb, fingers, lips, and tongue have a disproportionately large presentation. That is how they are looking at. Okay, so now after having been said, this is one of the thing. So I take the dorsal root ganglion, then relay in the spinal cord, cross to the opposite side, then ascend as a spinothalamic tract, relay in the thalamus, from thalamus to the cortex. That is simple. Now I wanted to include the other projections, because you can just see that same projections have a collateral here. This gives a collateral here because this spinothalamic tract, when ascending up in the medulla or in the midbrain level, so though it will be lateral to the medial lemniscal fibers, you can just see that. So now you have this in this reticular system, the collaterals are given, and that forms the spino-reticular network. That means each of these collaterals they give to the reticular system. Reticular system in turn gives projection to the thalamus, especially the reticular nucleus of thalamus and the intralaminar nucleus of thalamus. So that means from here that will go, that is a reticulothalamic tract. Reticulothalamic tract. So now that is one of the relay. So the first order neurons, is they ascend up and they will go to the cortex, area 312. That is already I have described. So now these are spinoreticular relays, and we have another relay here in the mesencephalon, somewhere around the periaqueductal gray. These are spinomesencephalic neurons, and these are the two neurons. Now, so that means first order neurons same as this thing. These are indirect pathways I was trying to talk about. One, there is a relay in the reticular system. There is a relay in the mesencephalic nucleus. Now, so this is the thing which describes, because what I was trying to show here is not very clear. So now this precisely describes about that. So this is the sensation coming up here, comes to the and relays in layer 5, and then ascends at the spinothalamic tract. You just see that this green one is the spinothalamic tract, and it gives a collateral here, rostroventral medulla. Rostroventral medulla, reticular system. This is a reticular system. So now you come here, this is mesencephalon or midbrain. The mesencephalon around the periaqueductal gray, they give one collateral. So then they will give in the lateral brachialis nucleus, parabrachialis nucleus, they give a relay. So that is also one of the, just before the mesencephalon. Okay, so from here, the fibers, the green ones reach to the VPL, the ventroposterolateral nucleus of thalamus. And from here, it will go to the somatosensory cortex area 312. That tells the position of the whatever the sensation which is originating. Then we have the relays here, the reticular system that is not shown. From here, there is a reticulothalamic pathway. Reticulothalamic pathway. This reticulothalamic pathway would be relayed onto the reticular nucleus is somewhere here, and then the intralaminar nucleus, that is the internal medullary nucleus, that bundle. You have that Y-shaped structure, internal medullary lamina. So they will relay there. And from here, it would, the third generation or the fibers originate, they will go to the entire mantle of the cortex. So that means the reticular or internal medullary laminae fibers, they diverge to the entire cortical structures that would produce the arousal response. That is from reticular nucleus to the thalamus and then to the cortex. Then we have another thing, the parabrachial nucleus. This parabrachial nucleus is connected with the amygdala of the limbic system. Now from the amygdala, it will activate the insular cortex. That is one other cortex that would try to see the details, especially the affective details of the particular sensation. Then it will also have a connections with the cingulate cortex. So now that's the second component. And periaqueductal gray, this one is also connected with the hypothalamus, the amygdala, limbic system, hippocampus, and other areas. So just after having been said, so then one is a direct pathway reaching thalamus to the somatosensory cortex. Then we have a reticular nucleus, the paraqueductal gray, that is a mesencephalic projection, and parabrachial projection. So all these things would reach different sites. You can just see that. Now let me read spinothalamic relays, indirect pathways. So I'm talking about the indirect pathways. Indirect pathways means from reticular nucleus to the thalamus and to the cortex. So these indirect pathways are necessary for the autonomic reflexes. So whatever in the reticular nucleus, these autonomic reflexes include the blood pressure regulation, the respiratory regulation. Suppose if I am, if there is a painful stimuli, maybe respiration may be altered, the blood pressure may be altered. So that type of a pressure response is brought about by the reticular relays. So that is the autonomic response. So then we have from the reticular system, it will go to the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus in turn modulates the autonomic activity. Also brings about the behavioral changes, the hypothalamus. Then we have intermediate, internal medullary, some of these reticular system, they relay into the internal medullary laminae and the reticular nucleus, that is for the arousal response or awake state. Then we have a second one, the mesencephalic nucleus. They will be relayed into, because whatever coming from the mesencephalic nucleus reaches thalamus, but it will not reach the same part of the thalamus where these sensory modalities are already relayed. That is the ventral posterior lateral nucleus of thalamus. So now they will be the lateral posterior nucleus of thalamus. The lateral posterior nucleus of thalamus is connected with some part of the medial, and then it is connected with the cingulate cortex, hippocampus and cingulate cortex. You can imagine that is for the behavior and the other aspects associated with the limbic system. Then we have the medial dorsal nucleus. Again, this is about emotional responses, emotional reactions. So these things are for emotional reactions. Suppose if there is a pain or a pressure or any thermal sensations, so they should be able to respond to the whatever they call the medial dorsal nucleus or a limbic cortex. Then we have a relay here to the amygdala. So this amygdala is concerned with a part of the limbic system. It connects with the hippocampus, and then from the hippocampus it reaches to the cingulate cortex. I have just shown about the page circuit in which from the hippocampus and then to the fornix reach the mammillary body to the thalamus, and then thalamus to the cingulate cortex. So that is one of the emotional reactions. And this also is connected with the prefrontal cortex. Then we have the lateral parabrachial nucleus. This parabrachial nucleus is connected with the amygdala. It has a connections with the amygdala and hypothalamus. Amygdala and hypothalamus becomes important, especially when it is modulating the thermal sensation. And also the hypothalamus involvement is important when it's modulating the pain sensations or other sensuous touch. So all these things, they are going through the insular cortex. Okay, that is about the location of the indirect pathways. Now, I'm just trying to tabulate the differences between the dorsal column sensations and the ventrolateral column sensations. Now, the dorsal column sensations and ventrolateral column, here I have put the parameters. These evolution-wise, these are neo-sensations. The dorsal column sensations are neo-sensations, and these are paleo-sensations. The purpose of these sensations, it is the precision and discrimination in case of a dorsal column. That's precise, exact, and that is precision, especially maintaining the body posture and maintaining responses, or trying to understand, or to perform a particular motor skill or sensory act. So all those things, it is a precise, specific, and it discriminates. It will give a thorough picture of the part of the sensations. Whereas the ventrolateral column sensation is vague, emotional, and it has affective or behavioral components. So that means it is either you may be hurt, you will respond in response to that, or you may become aggressive, you may become apathic, whatever the emotional components they are working on. That is about the purpose. What are those modalities carried by the dorsal column? As we have already seen, fine touch, tactile localization, tactile acuity, proprioception, stereognosis. These are the modalities of sensations that carried by the dorsal column. Whereas in case of the ventrolateral, we have, it is carrying the ventrolateral column carries the pain, thermal sensation, crude touch, the pressure, and the tickle and itch and the sexual sensations. So these are the modalities it carries. So then what is the threshold for the dorsal column sensations? As compared to ventrolateral column sensations, they require a lower strength of stimulus. So that means a threshold is lower for them. The threshold is higher for them. This lower and higher are in comparison to each other. Then fibers. So these the dorsal column sensations involve fast conducting fibers, group 1 and group 2. Whereas ventrolateral column sensations involves group 3 and 4 fibers. So these are slow conducting fibers. They are A delta and C fibers. You can just see that conduction velocity may be about 5 to 10 or 5 to 20. Something like that with A delta fibers, and C fibers is least, maybe less than 3 meters per second. Then where these dorsal column fibers are relayed, so they are relayed in the medulla, because what happens in the dorsal column, it comes here, ascend as a fasciculus gracilis and fasciculus cuneatus, reach the medulla, relay in nucleus gracilis and nucleus cuneatus, cross over, and then ascend as a medial lemniscal bundle. So that is crossing in the medulla in the nucleus gracilis and nucleus cuneatus. So here it is crossing at the segmental level, and especially lamina 5 of the segment, or lamina 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the segment. Second order neurons. in the dorsal column are highly focused. They are known as a medial lemniscal bundle. They are known as a medial lemniscal bundle. Whereas ventrolateral column sensations, they are also some, because 90% of them are ascending up as a spinothalamic bundles. They reach the ventrolateral, ventroposterolateral nucleus of thalamus. These are direct pathways. That is for localization of the particular sensory modality. So now they have also having, as I mentioned, a spino-reticular for the indirect pathway, a spino-mesencephalic for the indirect pathway. So now coming back, the thalamic nuclei involved for dorsal column sensation is the ventroposterolateral column, ventroposterolateral nucleus of thalamus. Whereas in case of the ventrolateral column, so there will be more than two group of neurons or nuclei are involved. One primarily for the direct pathway, it is a VPL is involved, ventroposterolateral nucleus is involved. Whereas for others it will involve the reticular nucleus and internal medullary lamina and lateral posterior nucleus, lateral dorsal nucleus, and so on. Even some part of the anterior nucleus. Here it's only VPL, very focused. So now this VPL is mixed up with the medial lemniscal bundle. This is here the medial lemniscal bundle. It is mixed up with the medial lemniscal bundle and ascent. Okay, that's about the thalamic release. Now the processing. So now if you are looking at the processing, it is primarily or mainly done in S1, that is the somatosensory area number 1, that is the parietal cortex area 312. Then followed by S2, that is 43 and 40 Brodmann areas. Then somatosensory association area 5 and 7. So these are mainly it is processed, and through this somatosensory association area, it tries to bring in all the attributes, all the attributes here. In case of the ventrolateral sensations, the processing is done at several places. One, of course, the thalamic projections to S1, the area S1, thalamic projections to S1, that is for the localization and attributes of the particular sensory modality. In addition, the thalamic projections that reach the cingulate cortex and the limbic, they are meant for the emotional responses associated with a particular modality. Then we have the parabolical nucleus and the insular and the prefrontal cortex. These things, it is to give the finer details of the judgment, what to do, how to respond, whether to ignore or not to ignore, and all those attributes that particular modality that is done. Then a reticular thing, because they have a processing at the reticular level. From the reticular level, it is giving to the reticular nucleus and these things. This is for arousal or alerting response. Suppose if these neurons are cut, there is a coma, or if these neurons are suppressed, that becomes anesthesia. Okay, now what I was trying to provide here, the direct pathways and the indirect pathways. Now let us consider what are these spinothalamic direct pathways and indirect. These direct pathways of the spinothalamic tract, they are directly reaching the thalamus and reach the cortex. Let us see what is the tract, either anterior spinothalamic tract or lateral spinothalamic tract. Same thing here. Their origin is from 1 to 5, 1 to 1, 4 and 5, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All the 4, 5 nuclei are involved. But in case of the indirect pathway, you can just see that it is not the anterolateral spinothalamic tract. It also have the spino-reticular tract. Spino-reticular tract also have a spino-mesenchymal tract. Spino-mesenchymal tract where it is relayed in and around the periaqueductal gray. That becomes an important aspect, especially in modulating the hypothalamic components associated with the sensation. Now, the lamina, you just see that it is more extensive indirect pathway. It will be 1, 4, 5, even 7, 8 or inward. So then direct pathways contralateral. So they are on the opposite side. Indirect pathways, because indirect pathways are mixed up in the reticular nucleus in the medulla, pons, and midbrain. And when they mixed up, it is a bilateral representation. Bilateral representation. Here it is a unilateral, that is contralateral side of the body. So then synapse in reticular formation, no, direct pathways do not have a synapse, but here indirect pathways, yes, they have. They form the spino-reticular network. Then subcortical targets. So that means the subcortical areas, that like diencephalic areas and limbic areas and autonomic centers, how they are connected. So now these indirect pathways of the spinothalamic tract, they connect to the hypothalamus, they connect to the limbic system, they connect to the autonomic centers. So that is why whenever there is some activation of these spinothalamic tract, especially whether it is a pain, a thermal sensation, or a crude pressure, or a touch, that would bring about certain changes in the autonomic responses mediated through the hypothalamus and the limbic system. Then thalamic nuclei involved. In case of the direct pathway, it is very clear. It's with a VPL, and through this VPL, they will reach to the parietal cortex as expected. Okay. Whereas here, it will go to the intralaminar nuclei and other midline nuclei, especially thalamic nuclei for the indirect pathway, because they are coming from the reticulothalamic, mesenchymalothalamic. So that means they are coming from the indirect pathway, and they are relayed in intralaminar and other midline nuclei, and they will in turn produce the thalamocortical non-specific projections. The cortical location and role. The cortical location is a parietal lobe, S1, the somatosensory area number 1. And it is a cingulate cortex here. It's parietal lobe here. It is a cingulate cortex, especially for emotion, for the indirect pathway. So now the role is, this direct pathway is a discriminative path. So that means this direct pathway, the anterior spinothalamic tract or a lateral spinothalamic tract, it provides information about the quality of the sensation, the power or the intensity of the sensation, and the location of the sensation. So that is that is the role, discriminative component. Whereas in case of the indirect pathway, it would be affective, arousal, and it raises number of emotional responses. Okay, direct pathway, they are other functions. They also carry the temperature and the touch. So these are the direct pathway and the indirect pathway. So I mean to say that it is the spinothalamic tract. The spinothalamic tract itself, because it directly goes along with the, goes there lateral to the medial lemniscus and enter the VPL, and then relay along with the same type of neurons who represent a particular area and share that, and they will send the information. So that is how the thalamus is looking at. Then comes the summary of the anterolateral sensations. These are paleo sensations. They include pain, thermal sensation, crude touch, pressure, tickle, itch, and sexual sensations. They are carried by the slow conducting path fibers. That means they are not fast. And there is a they cross to the opposite side at a segmental level. Maybe one or two segments up and down may happen, but at the segmental level in the spinal cord, and then ascend at the spinothalamic tract, where they are relayed directly to VPL, as I was mentioning, along with the medial lemniscal fibers. These are medial lemniscal bundle or medial lemniscal fibers. The indirect pathways, they have anterolateral sensations, have indirect pathways. They reach to the thalamic nucleus via the reticular formation or reticular system, via the parabrachial nucleus is situated in the pontine area, and then via the mesencephalic nucleus situated in the midbrain. So that means reticular, parabrachial, and mesencephalic, they will have, it is relayed there. From here, it will reach the thalamus and other areas of the brain. Thalamic projections, especially those are direct ones, they reach to S1, somatosensory area 1, with the dorsal column sensations. The reticular sensations, they will ascend to the thalamus, reticulothalamic tract. In addition, the autonomic nuclei are situated even before thalamus. They will try to activate the autonomic centers there in the medulla, especially which are regulating the blood pressure, respiration, and other visceral responses. They will also activate the hypothalamus, that means to sustain this effect to the arousal and autonomic responses, because hypothalamus is responsible for many of the endocrine profile or endocrine functions. Then parabrachial, this is the upper pontine nucleus. This is connected with the amygdala and the insular cortex, and this is for introspection, integration, and emotional exteriorization and socialization. This is parabrachial component of the interlateral sensation. The mesencephalic, that is a periaqueductal gray and around. So they will go to the cingulate cortex and the prefrontal cortex. And the cingulate cortex and the prefrontal cortex, they have these emotional responses, the memory, the motivation, and all those things are coming. This is the summary of the interlateral column sensations. Today, I have given you very short these things, and I want you to study this chapter. The books I have referred here, the Guyton's textbook of medical physiology, then Kendall's textbook of physiology, neuroscience, especially the textbook on neuroscience, the Genong's review of physiology, and the Samson Wright's physiology. The assignments, I just give you the assignments. Please be prepared with these. Name the sensations carried by the ventrolateral column sensation. Ventrolateral column. Draw a diagram. Please practice the diagram. Draw a diagram showing the pathway of these sensations. Draw a diagram showing the pathway of these sensations with the functional significance. So as I have shown in my lectures. Now write short notes on label diagram of anterospinothalamic tract. Name various sensations carried by interlateral column, and name thalamic nuclei involved in crew touch. Name various sensations carried by interlateral. Again, it has a repeat. I'm sorry about that. Indirect pathways of spinothalamic tract and the spino-mesencephalic pathways of interlateral column sensations. So you try to prepare these questions for yourself. And you can also write the differences between the anterolateral column sensation or ventrolateral column sensations with that of the dorsal column sensations. That would revise your both the sensations in a nutshell. So you try to revise that, perhaps add that maybe here. I will add that maybe I will add a name various sensations of the differentiate. No. So I have already, so the differences between interlateral and dorsal column sensations, you're right. Okay, with this, next time, that is tomorrow I will take up the receptors, pathway, and processing of a crude touch. I will deal with this component in my next lecture. Thank you.